It is the Anfield Wrap. Neil Atkinson here, joined by Dan Austin, by Josh Williams and by Beth Lindop, to have a chat about Takefusa Kubo, who is a big, strong link coming overnight around Liverpool with a release clause. We'll get onto that in a minute or two. Tomorrow, believe it or not, I am fortunate enough to be flying to the United States, ending up in Pittsburgh on a big, long Tuesday, because we will be watching Liverpool play a game of football in Pittsburgh, which means that on Thursday, we are going to be at the pitch, hopefully not the pitch. It says the pitch, but not the pitch that the game's at, I'd like to think. Instead, we'll be at a bar that's called The Pitch to do our live show. And then we will be in Washington on the 27th at Exiles, which we've been before. Looking forward to seeing everyone. Philadelphia on the 30th at Brauhaus Schmitz there. And then on the 2nd of August, we're at Tin Roof Columbia in South Carolina. Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are going to sell out quite soon. So if you're listening to this and you've been umming and ahhing, they are going to sell out. Craig tells me this emphatically. So do be conscious and have that in all of your decision-making stuff. Washington's a little bit slower because they're not playing in Washington. We just got friends there and we're bobbing in and we're looking forward to it. Columbia, do keep your eye out on that as well. But yes, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are going to sell out. This is your warning that that's what is going to happen in the next sort of 48 hours or so from what Hannon's been saying to me. All right, then we're going to get stuck into Takefusa Kubo and also a general sort of conversation about the shape of Liverpool's attack. There are links that, having done this now for some think 80 or 90 years, Dan Austin, there are links that I straight away just sort of think I just can't see it. Just don't quite, something doesn't feel right about this one way or another. There are ones that sort of start in that position and then something perseveres and then suddenly you've got yourself a Tony Gordon t-shirt sorted out that often don't quite come to fruition, but there's a genuine excitement there and they become real. Then there's the ones that just straight away make you go, yeah, that feels a bit Liverpool, especially with the way Liverpool go about the business. There's a number of things on this one that makes me think this is a bit Liverpool. You'll probably have seen the player play for Japan if you haven't seen him play for Sociedad. Do you feel as though this one is one of those ones, category 3, feels a bit real? Because it does to me.
There's a lot of the Liverpool modus operandi there, isn't there? In terms of his age, the kind of club that he's currently playing for.
Yeah.
I'd imagine not too difficult to get him out of there and to sell the idea that you come and play for Liverpool. You're not necessarily our main man, but you're part of a bigger picture. And if you play well over time, then you become that main man or whatever. And there are some things in the way that he seems to play. I've not seen loads of them, maybe bits a couple of times playing for Sociedad and a few for Japan. I had a little look at like the numbers that he puts in and stuff, and there's things there that I think Liverpool would be quite excited about. He seems to carry the ball really well. He's quick over the ground, strong dribbler, stuff like that. Can help move a team up the pitch. From the little bits that I have seen of him and what the numbers suggest, he seems almost like a right-sided Diaz, in that he's left-footed, but predominantly he's played on the right. I think he's done a fair bit on the left and as like an attacker midfielder as well. But in terms of that idea of giving him the ball and then he tries to run 20 yards with it and everyone moves up with him and then he gives it to someone to do something else, I think it's not entirely different from what Liverpool have been asking Diaz to do over the last like 2.5 years that he's been here. The concern that I would have about him is that there's not a ton of output in terms of goals or assists. So I had a look in he's played 159 games in La Liga. Some of them are for Mallorca, some are for Villarreal, but most of them are for Sociedad as a starter, certainly. And he's got 40 goal contributions in that time. I think it's like 22 goals and 18 assists or something like that. So a fairly even split, which, you know, isn't a bad thing. But it means 1 in 4, which isn't like awful by any means. It's not an indicator that he's a bad player, but it's not like, oh wow, he seems like the absolute business and it's just a matter of time before someone at a much higher level picks him up and he really takes off. There could be something like much deeper than that they think, you know, if you just harness this particular skill that he's got or this maybe like physical asset that we think he's got, you know, the raw speed, which does seem to be amazing, then we think we can turn him into this kind of player, or we think we can improve the output or the final ball or the final shot or whatever it is by doing this, then yeah, great. But I would be surprised looking at him at the minute if they looked at him as a player and looked at the output and went, oh, he's like our new starter on that side and we're fine to move Salah to play somewhere else and this fella's going to take over and he won't necessarily do the same output as Salah, but we're confident that he'll get, you know, plenty of goals and assists over the course of a season. I think they'd have to really work on some things for that to be the case.
when we think about the Liverpool sweet spot, Beth, he's got a release clause. He's 23. He's just got himself to the point he's got 189 senior appearances in European football. That's only appearances, I can't say on minutes or competitions for that matter, plus 35 caps for Japan. So that gives whoever's analysing him for Liverpool 200 games to look at in terms of a development curve. The age seems about right. The minimum fee aspect suited Liverpool the last couple of seasons. I think there's a pattern there as well. That's one of the reasons why, and also to get into where Liverpool's squad currently is. Liverpool don't currently have a ton of options who play that side and deputise for Salah, not least because Salah so rarely needs deputising for. But all of this, to me, makes this one looks Liverpool shaped, even if it's not Liverpool.
Yeah, I agree, and I also agree with you in terms of the links from Japan, because when they come out of that country, they do tend to have something in them, whether it's as advanced as the Japanese reports are suggesting. But I think the outlet that first reported this were the ones who had the Endo news first, maybe. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's something in it, like you say. I think the profile, his age, and everything like that speaks to the fact that Liverpool would possibly, he'd certainly be on the radar. The thing, similar to Dan, really, like I've not seen an awful lot of him, but the lack of output is concerning. Now, of course, he is only 23. He's got plenty of room to grow, in a better side and with more, I guess, elite players around him, then potentially that output could increase. But I think if you look at the biggest sort of gripe with Liverpool's attack last season, it was just not putting the ball in the back of the net. There were no shortage of chances created or things like that. But aside from Mo Salah, who himself had a little bit of a shoddy patch in front of goal toward the latter half of the season, it was just missing chances and not being prolific, and that's what cost Liverpool. And I think, to me, it doesn't make sense to necessarily spend, I think his release clause is reported to be in the region of about £50 million, which seems like a lot of money to invest in a player who isn't likely to come in and be a starter week in, week out, and is maybe just someone who could potentially live up to the potential. If it was if it was for like 25, 30 million, I could see it. But I just sort of think, at 50 million, you want a decent player who's going to come in and make an impact and make the team better. And I don't necessarily think, certainly at the moment, that he makes this Liverpool team better.
He gets his 7 goals, Josh, in 22 starts, 4 sub-appearances, according to Wikipedia. I haven't sort of looked it up there. I haven't got the full minutes at this point in time. They are all 7 league goals. It's worth pointing out that, on the whole, the top scorer for Sociedad last season was Oyarzabal, who scored 9 in 20 starts and 8 substitute appearances. At times you've got to, I think, compare players to the effectively who they're playing with. On the whole there, it's worth also pointing out Sociedad scored only 51 league goals across the 38 games over the course of the campaign. So you begin to whittle this down, and it's worth saying that, it's a percentage, therefore he's effectively got 1/7 of Sociedad's goals in full over the course of the campaign. But the output concern is the one thing that doesn't feel very Liverpool. Change of pace feels Liverpool. Whether or not he's genuinely lightning is a bit up in the air. But
I don't think he is.
So, from what I've seen, I don't think he is either. But he obviously clearly grafts. He's clearly very technically gifted. There's no getting away from that.
Definitely.
It is the output question that I think is what will make everyone go, that's the thing that doesn't quite ring true.
Yeah, completely agree. That's the one element that for me would make the deal slightly surprising. Just how much emphasis Liverpool in the past, specifically when they're running on data and all that, with the suits in charge, it does tend to be, what's the output of this player above everything else? And then you consider everything else almost as like a second order thing. So his actual product, when it comes to specifically shots, really, and putting the ball in the net and XG and that, is not particularly high. He seems to be more of a provider for me, more of a creator. I get Coutinho vibes from him, to be honest, but without the long shots. I think he's got very creative passer, very, very technical, really good in tight spaces. But I don't think he's threatening him behind quick, which is a bit, again, it's not particularly Liverpool. I think you usually need to have that if you're a forward for Liverpool. But I also, despite that what I've just said, though, I am quite high on the player. Though. I don't hate the link at all. I think if it's happening, I'm generally in favour of it. I think he's got good availability across his career. Very few injuries and that. Plays about 2,000 minutes every season. Good age. Seems to work really hard, seems to be versatile. He's got that left-footed trait as well, which is quite rare. There's a few downsides, as I said, like the output and that, and he's also really small. Like he's just not like built like Szoboszlai or someone like that, but you know, that's generally the case usually when it comes to forwards. But yeah, I do like the player. As I said, I get Coutinho vibes when I'm watching him, like. But there's
no need to talk him down.
No, it's just in comparison to looking at like when Liverpool sign a Diaz or a Mane or a Jota, he doesn't seem to be quite. You know, you can look at him and think
he seems more attacking midfielder than forward.
Yeah, probably a bit more of like a playmaking. Someone with runners beyond him, as opposed to being the guy who's running beyond and finishing the move. He'll maybe be, as I said, the provider, the assister, you know, that sort of thing. I've just checked his numbers for Sociedad and he should have more assists. He's just playing with bad finishes by the looks of it, which can happen. You know, I do think his numbers will obviously take a boost as well at Liverpool. So yeah, it's a bit weird, surprised, but also not.
Maybe there's a chance that if they are genuinely interested in him and want to buy him, it's not based on where he's been playing for them. You know, we don't necessarily know entirely what the manager is going to do, but they've had they've had a more attacking midfielder type player, I think, in the time that he was there. So maybe there's an idea that he could play as like a more traditional 10, and that burst that he has, that's more acceleration than like absolute raw top speed or whatever, might be useful in that scenario. And what Josh was saying about, you know, these assists or assists that he should be getting that he's not, and working in small spaces and stuff like that could potentially work in a different way than what Sociedad have been trying to make it work in that time. Seen Liverpool loads in the past take a player that you look at and think, well, okay, he's played in this position for this team before, and you just kind of expect that's what he's going to translate as. Ronaldo is probably the best example of that.
Literally part 2 of the show, it's coming.
There's been plenty since who are similar. I think Gakpo's one, for example, who end up doing something really quite different, but by using the same raw materials. So there might be things in the way that he plays that they go, this would be really potentially useful, but in a different way to the way that he's been asked to use it so far for the previous sides he's played for.
And this is the key part of it, Beth, really, in that it does seem, again, a spot to strengthen. Diaz has done bits for Liverpool on the right-hand side. Jota's done the occasional little bit for Liverpool on the right-hand side. There is Elliott. And the one thing I would say is, as everyone's talking here, I do feel a little bit like people are describing Harvey Elliott to me. There is an element of that here, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, in that, you know, if Liverpool are going to commit to having that sort of player on the pitch at all times, it makes sense to have more than one of them if you're going to have it in the squad. And then there is Salah in general, Beth, because he has been sort of so unique. The reports where he was playing as a number 9 in the behind closed doors game against Preston, Salah. And a lot of this, again, comes back to A, what do players think they're doing this season? Not just Salah, but Salah is a key one. And B, what does Arne Slot think those players are doing this season? And what is it that he's going to want to do? And that's where this sort of link does make me wonder in that way about whether or not there is a genuine sort of this is what we want to do and this is how we're going to be ready for it.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard to read too much into the Salah at centre forward thing, isn't it? Until there's more bodies back and
other lads who play centre forward.
Yeah. So, you know, if Núñez is back and Salah's still at number 9, then maybe that's an indicator that that's where Slot sees him. I know that's something that we've spoke about before, and I'd be intrigued. I'm not saying he'd be, you know, a huge success there, but I would be interested with him seeming to have lost obviously a yard of pace and seems to be a little bit of a reticence to take players on in the way that he used to. I would be intrigued to see what Salah could do at 9, which would then make, you know, having a capable deputy who's used to playing on the right it would make more sense. I suppose as well, Salah's he's not getting any younger, is he? Obviously could potentially leave the club next summer. But even if he stays, you know, we saw him pick up his first sort of serious muscle injury, didn't we, toward the end of last season? That might become more of a common occurrence. So to have, you know, a young player come in and maybe learn the trade a little bit off Salah isn't maybe the worst thing. My concern is, I think we've got quite a few players who you don't really know what the best position is. And I think as a consequence, they've maybe suffered a little bit. I think Harvey Elliott is the typical one. He's almost had to sacrifice himself a lot to play wherever the team need him. And, you know, it's great to have players who can do that, but it also sometimes feels like you're then not getting the best out of them. Cody Gakpo's another one. Szoboszlai, even McAllister. Even, you know, Fabio Carvalho. If you're looking at sort of playing him as more of an attacking midfielder or a 10 or whatever, then you've got Carvalho there, who's maybe a similar build as well, and also a very technical player. So it almost feels like, I don't know if he's exactly what Liverpool need, but we know that the backroom staff want to be the smartest people in the room, and maybe they've seen something in this player that some of Europe's other big clubs haven't necessarily seen. And of course, he came through at Barcelona. He went to Real Madrid. Granted, didn't make an appearance for them in the league certainly, but you don't get sort of picked up by those two clubs if you're not a decent player. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it all plays out.
What are you anticipating? How would you like it to be? Do you want it to be different from last season, Dan? How would you like it to be different from last season? What do you think may be different from last season with the way in which Liverpool attack? Have you got anything that you're sort of seeing things that other teams do, thinking I wouldn't mind a little bit more of this, I wouldn't mind a little bit more of that?
I'd like Salah to be closer to the goal on a regular basis again. That doesn't mean that he starts down the middle every single week necessarily, but I think over the past 2 seasons, to varying degrees of success, he's ended up really sticking wide. A lot of it is a consequence of what they're doing at the back, isn't it, with the inverted full-back, and you don't quite get the same width on that side anymore. But he's the only actual reliable goal scorer in the whole squad. There are some other really talented forwards there. Jota, when he plays, is a really good goal scorer, but he misses swathes of seasons all the time. And the other 3, for various different reasons, don't necessarily get as many as you would ideally like them to. So I don't necessarily like the idea that you have your one absolute reliable goal scorer stood on the touchline an awful lot, or going to the byline and trying to cut it back for other people more than they're trying to do it for him necessarily. That could be a shape thing. That could be literally moving him and saying, you play as the 9 or the 10 or whatever the shape ends up being. But if I were involved in buying a forward, and I think I would ideally like them to, which would probably mean one of the current ones leaving, because I think they've got enough in terms of numbers, in terms of numbers of players anyway at the minute. Then I would be focused on, is there someone who we think can score plenty, not necessarily as many as Salah, but we think over the course of a campaign will not necessarily miss that much football and will be a consistent threat, and we know pretty well where we think this player is going to play and how they're going to fit in. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go and buy someone who scored like 25 in Serie A or something last year. We've seen them in the past take somebody like Mane, who was scoring not necessarily a ton of goals, but he was often scoring really important goals for Southampton against good sides. Doing it, sometimes playing as a 9 for them, but often off the left, different positions and stuff like that. If they think there's someone that they can take and go, what, this person over the course of a campaign will probably get like 18, 20 in all comps, we're pretty confident about that, 12, 13 of them will be in the league, then I would maybe be more inclined to a player like that than someone like this, who I think has got loads of really strong technical attributes, seems pretty efficient on the ball and stuff like that, but isn't necessarily the threat that you would ideally like. Because I think if you were to take a player like this, it might be really, really good, but it would be a little bit more of the same of what's already there. It wouldn't feel like, this is a significant change in terms of there's less pressure on this one fella to score the important goals and score the vast majority of them. But then it comes back to stuff like I'd like it if the fullbacks were higher and wider again. Essentially, a lot of what I want Liverpool to do is just play like it's 2019 again, because it was really good. But it's a new manager and loads of the players have changed since then, so you can't just ask them to do that. But that's what I still think, that there are enough people in the squad that play the majority of the time who are really set up well to play in that way. But then there's loads of like little, can you convince Alexander-Arnold to do that again? And would that mean that he stays or not? There's loads of like individual little battles to win in order to just play that way of football again. So it's probably really difficult, but I still think that if you were to go through what you would like Liverpool to play most like, especially against good teams in finals or against City or against Arsenal or whatever in the league, I think I'd really like the fullbacks high and wide. I'd really like Salah a bit more inside towards the goal. So it's all about how can we maybe get back to that, and can we have someone else who, regardless of where exactly they play, in a front 3 or a front 4 or whatever it is, can maybe take a bit of the goal scoring burden off Salah.
I think we might actually get a little bit of that, to be honest. I mean, I don't want to move too early, but I did look at as much footage as I could from the friendly that we played. And one of the elements that I thought was quite interesting was the overlapping fullbacks way back. And it was interesting in the sense that if Bradley was overlapping on the right, Tsimikas becomes an inverted fullback, basically positionally, and sits and provides a bit of like a compact safety net. But if Tsimikas goes on the opposite side and the ball's over there, Bradley's doing the same from the opposite side. So you're kind of like on like a tilt almost. And it was a case of overlapping fullbacks where neither one of them is the inverted guy and the runner. They just kind of took turns a piece at doing that, depending on where the ball was and where the situation was developing and that. And I think looking at Kubo, he looks like the kind of player who probably would need a fullback overlapping him. To be honest, I don't think he's threatening him behind that much. If I'm totally honest, but I do think we can't overestimate the left-footed element that he offers. That's typical coming from me. I think it's really important. But if you think of any great side ever, mate, they have the same level of threat on one side as they do on the opposite side, because one fella's usually right-footed, one fella's usually left-footed. Like, I've just made a little list here now, just quickly. Salah, for example, when Liverpool were peaking. Gareth Bale, when Real Madrid were exploding with Benzema and Ronaldo. Ian Robben, when Bayern Munich were flying. Messi for like a decade for Barcelona. Who else have I got here? Can't even read my own writing. Mahrez is another one. Sane, even Giggs. You've always got the same threat on one side as you have on the other, and you've got goals from both sides, threat from both sides. Liverpool, if they lose Salah eventually in the next year or so, and you play a right footer over there, I just hate that dynamic. And Man United have had that for years, where like they've played, Rashford over there and Pogba played over there for a period. Just loads of different players over there, and they finally got Anthony, and he was a left footer, and he's just not that good. So they're still struggling with it. And I think now Ahmad is making a step up as the left footer there, to be honest. Ahmad Diallo. But I think Liverpool would be right, in my opinion, in almost taking a hit in terms of their quality and the output, maybe, to get in a lad who was actually left footed. Because if you lose Salah, the only left footer you've got who isn't a fullback is Elliott. And I think if you're playing with balance and that, and you're thinking of tactical balance and all that on the pitch, you want more of that, basically. And I think Kubo would help with that, and he'd provide a bit of a contingency plan for Salah. As hard as that is, he'd offer something in that regard.
I think, though, the next sort of phase of that, what you described there, and I looked at the same stuff from the friendly, though, I think, therefore, you can't be... What Dan describes when he describes it is what he wants is that idea of that very robust 3. 2, the full-backs go, so you're attacking still with 5. 3 forwards, the 2 full-backs, and then the midfield is obviously support. Then you look at 21-22, when I'd argue it becomes, you've got your 2 centre-halves, then you've got effectively in front of that Thiago and Fabinho, sometimes Henderson, occasionally Kai, to create this little box in there as well. And then one of the full-backs stays a little closer, and then the other midfielder, often Henderson, goes, and so you're attacking still with 5, and you've got these lads who are back, and there's an element of that. I think the key thing then becomes, and this is why I think it is interesting the way this player has been described on a couple of occasions, I think there is then a little thing about who it is who becomes separate to that box, if you see what I mean. So if you're holding a full-back back, you still want to be attacking across the breadth of the pitch, to your point of make sure you can do it both ways. And that makes me think you are back looking at more of an attacking midfielder than, for instance, we, at least in our own minds, because I don't think it's always accurate, but the way we perceive 2018, 2019 and the bits of 2020 is that they didn't really play with an attacking midfielder. I don't think that's always accurate, don't get me wrong, because I think that there was much more fluidity in terms of what Klopp was doing then than maybe that goes on to be in a couple of areas. But in 21-22, when they win 19 out of 20 against the bottom 20 and score 56 goals against the bottom 20, bottom 10, the 20 games against the bottom 10, Josh, they score 56 goals against them, and they have more of an attacking midfielder but more of a defensive 2, which is the other in the midfield, which is the other thing that's been said repeatedly about how Slot plays, even though he himself went, well, I just do 4-3-3. Yeah. And that makes me think that this player is there to supplement that in concert possibly with Salah, with Elliott, with a couple of others.
Yeah, well, even just looking at Liverpool over the past, couple of years, like there's always runners in beyond, always, and Liverpool have got them in abundance even still. Bradley, for example, is one of them. He's a lad who wants to run in beyond. Szoboszlai, I think, has elements of that about him. Núñez, definitely. Diaz, I think Gakpo can do it. So I don't overly mind getting in a player who wants to feed those lads, to be honest. And Kubo definitely has that element to his game. But yeah, I think going back to Dan's point on width especially, one of the interesting elements of last season is Liverpool, I think, posted like I think they averaged about 20.6 shots a game over the Premier League season. That's been done once in the Premier League ever, and that was by Chelsea, who broke the record for goals. Liverpool didn't get anywhere near that record, so we were creating a lot, but just the finishing was awful. And I think the finishing was awful because of
the finishing was average. It's important.
Yes. Do you think it was average? I think it was.
Well, it literally hits the expected goals.
Yeah, but in terms of the quantity though that we created.
So it wasn't above average, is my point.
It was the quantity was like poor quality is what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? So you can create less, but more clear-cut stuff is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So I think if you get in a player who's going to
So what you're saying is you'd sacrifice 5 shots to have more high-quality shots?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what Liverpool need to get towards this coming season, getting a bit more balanced, because I think a lot of them low-quality shots were just like blocked in really confined spaces.
Yeah.
That's a width problem where maybe you can stretch the pitch a little bit more horizontally and make a few more spaces and things like that. And I think Kubo could offer solutions in the final there without doubt.
Without coming across unbelievably smug, Beth, I am delighted I'm getting to see them this week. And the reason why is to begin to see what the shape's going to look like. Because for me, the only thing I feel I'm absolutely 100% certain on, and even then I might even not be 100% certain, but at the nearest I get to it is Nunez will play centre forward. Now, we're not even going to get to see him this week because he obviously has the extended break with Copa America, so you're not going to be able to check that out. But, just sort of seeing what it is that's being asked of the players, I think is going to be really, really intriguing in these pre-season friendlies. I understand people who are often a bit like, I'm not sure about pre-season friendlies. I understand why they end up in that position. This season, though, I don't quite anywhere near as much, because getting some answers to some of these questions is going to be really, really fascinating.
Yeah, and obviously the new manager as well. It's always, as you say, as much as he was quite adamant that he's a 4-3-3 man, then, we know from his time in the Netherlands that that's not always been the case. So
covers a multitude of sins, 4-3-3.
Yeah.
You just get to say it, don't you?
And so it will be really interesting, because obviously while, a lot of the first team, sort of the starters week in, week out, maybe won't be there for the duration of the US tour, I think as the weeks go on, we'll start to see a little bit more of that shape developing, and the personnel might change, but the way that they play hopefully will become a bit clearer. And I think it's quite exciting actually going into a new season, as much as it's slightly, there's a little bit of trepidation there of how Liverpool will fare under a new manager, seeing, maybe a fresh approach. And I think certainly I think as well, going back to Josh's point about finishing, I think, the XG over the course of the season, Liverpool might have been on target, but I think toward the back end of the season, there was a spell where they did underperform their XG quite significantly, and I think that's maybe clouded all of our judgment in terms of, the quality of the players and things like that. And listen, Nunez could come back and he could bang in 30 goals, in all comps, and all of a sudden we're saying we've got another really prolific centre forward to take the load off Salah's shoulders a little bit. But yeah, I think it is really exciting. I'm very jealous that you get to go and get to see them in person.
It's going to be very hot. That's the one thing I would say. Need to take some block and do something I very rarely do, which is don shorts.
Wow.
I'm not taking them kecks, no.
In front of people. I'm going to get a pair of white kecks, I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Whites and sky blue. So I'll take the sky blue ones, I'll take the white ones. Yeah, I'm going to look, I'm going to the man from Del Monte. That's my plan through there. But yeah, shorts might have to be worn in front of an audience, which I'm mostly against, to be honest with you. I think you've got to, offer people the dignity and respect of covering your legs. I noticed that you and Dan Austin haven't fucking bothered today. But, we'll go from there with it. Oh, you are? Sorry, good God.
Today, mate,
sorry, I'll pick on Jordan then instead. I am intrigued. I think you know about Nunez, Dan. I think you can. I think he has to be number 9. I think I can understand occasionally you might want him to pull wide. You might do it tactically for a game here and there because you want to try and early dominate someone at the back post or something. I can get into that, but I think Nunez is the one. I think the others you just don't at this point. I think Gakpo's just made a really strong argument for himself playing off the left. I think it's the most meaningful international football contribution of the summer from a Liverpool point of view is Gakpo's. I think you just end up sort of looking at them going, you could end up anywhere, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because movement is what kills poorer opposition.
Yeah, I think you're right about Nunez in terms of I don't imagine him playing anywhere else, but I could see other people playing 9.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that you only see him there, but I mean, I never really liked him wide that much under the previous manager, and from the basic stuff I know about the way that this one plays, I think it would suit him even less than what it previously did. So yeah, And then the others, we might just see loads of changes. I think there'll be a decent period of figuring out the way that they want to play. You know, they'll absolutely have a plan now, and you'll get to read into an awful lot of it from the matches you see while you're away. But I wouldn't be surprised if in October someone's doing something different to what they were doing before, just because they're testing the water with these different things and what might suit two players really quite well, and Liverpool are winning most of the games, and it seems like, you know, it's all pretty positive, might leave someone else a bit lost. And then you have to try and figure out a solution for both that player and whatever position they've been doing in up until that point. They've also got they're going to have more games. I know it's not until January that they play the 2 extra ones in the European Cup, but I'm sure that they will be planning for those games from essentially now, really, especially if you get to, you know, a League Cup semi-final and have to play those 2 as well. I really don't even know how that will actually all function in that space of time.
No, September, from when we get back of the international break in September, realistically right the way through until maybe the week before Christmas, and then there is Christmas on the horizon. They'll be playing every midweek. Where there's games, they're playing every midweek all the way through. Then there's the 5th round of the EFL Cup. They might have got knocked out in round 3 or 4, so you can't say about that. Then there's the Christmas period, which, as we know, is congested. Then the FA Cup comes in, and what they've done, because they've got rid of the FA Cup replays, is they've actually whacked a couple of league games in when the FA Cup replays would have been, along with the 7th and 8th European Cup games. So then it's just all the way through then until mid-February before he even gets a few days with them together on the training pitch, to be honest with you, Dan. That's how it's going to be.
So that's what I mean. So the experimentation has to happen in matches then, therefore. I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if you see somebody like Salah play in like 4 different positions or something like that, maybe, between now and like that time in February. Maybe one of them would just be for half an hour once and they'd go, fucking hell, that was awful, let's never do that again. But simply because of the amount of matches they're going to have to play, and that they will be hoping to play as well, because you want to play the most amount of matches to win the things. Then they might just have to try a lot of different stuff with a lot of different players. The shape may change over this time as well, you know, based on what fullbacks you've got available. That like tilted overlap thing that you're talking about, there might be some players that they don't necessarily fancy doing that. So you've got Gomez playing at left back, for example. You might just say, well, you're the one that sits then, you're the inverted one the entire game, and whoever's playing on the right, Bradley or Alexander-Arnold or whoever, you're the high up one. So we're going to knock that on the head for today and just play it a bit more straightforward. They're going to have to be adaptable, and some stuff that the manager puts in place will work, and some of it won't, just inevitably, I would think. And that will mean, particularly for the attackers more than anyone else, I think there might be a fair bit of changing things around, seeing what works, and then maybe in a few months' time getting to what feels like a happy working space for everyone.
More on that to come, because it fits into the fact that I wanted to talk about Gini Wijnaldum quite nicely. It's worth saying, because I think that master plans change and shift, and it happened for the previous manager as well. A lot of the time, we'll come on to talk about Wijnaldum in a second or two before then. Last week, I spoke to Ian Christie from the Royal Court about what goes on at the Royal Court and what they've got coming up. Joined by Ian Christie, who's the head of marketing at the Royal Court, to put the Royal Court, its position in Liverpool, and a couple of things they've got coming up in context. Ian, first and foremost, we'll talk about the couple of players you've got coming up, because there's a couple that are coming that are football related. What are they?
Well, we've got a couple of shows in the studio which are coming up. The first of which is I Am Steven Gerrard, which is one that we saw up at Hope Street Theatre. It's produced by Tiptree, who are the gang who work out of there. And it's a one-man show about a guy's relationship with life itself as a teenager growing into your 20s. But framed around the idea of hero worship, and you want to be Steven Gerrard. And we always look around the city to see what's going on. And when that one was on, we had a look. I'll be honest, first of all, we were looking at it because we thought the actor was good, so we had a little look at him. And then, that was Joe Cowan. And then, but the show itself, we're blown away by it. So we thought, well, we'll have to have a little bit of that. So we've taken it into our studio. Which is a nice 150 seats venue underneath the Royal Court.
And the second one is one written by Nicky?
Second one, it's one of Nicky Holt's. A lot of guys will know Nicky Holt from You'll Never Walk Alone, that show, and a lot of the big football shows he's done. That one is called Two Cities, Half the World Away. Now that's set at the 2016 Liverpool Man United Europa tie. And the idea is it's a Liverpool fan and a Man United fan get thrown together, get arrested and chucked in a cell together to save space. They're both desperate to get out to try and get set there for the match, and it starts off with that conflict, that constant, back and forth. I hate you because I hate you because. But they realise what we all really know is that actually there's a lot more that joins us together as football fans than there is that separates us.
When that idea and this is why I think the Royal Court's fascinating, that idea that you've gone up, you've seen what's happening at the Unity, you pulled it through. That's a massive part of how the Royal Court sees itself in the city, isn't it? You know, that idea of being able to first and foremost act as a springboard for other people as well, to showcase and to just to work internally with a lot of other sorts of, not just theatre companies in the city, but a lot of companies full stop. Yeah, I think we do. We kind of position ourselves, and we are. Like 95% of our income gets spent within Liverpool, or Liverpool City region, whether that's set building or staff or food or drink or whatever. We're local. And a lot of people know the Royal Court for the big comedy plays, the big ones that are on the main house, the big Christmas show, loads of stupid gags, loads of live music, all of that. But underneath all of that, we've got all these different things going on. We've got a youth theatre that's completely free to access. So if you want to join it, come along, you're in. No audition, no waiting fee, no fees, no waiting list, done. We've got a community choir at the other end, which is for older people who might want to join in, an amateur dramatics group, a writer's course. We built the studio about 5 years ago as a space where we could try things and put things on. And the idea is that we create this almost pipeline where people can come to us with half an idea for a play, gets developed in the studio, goes well, moves on, moves up. And that's the same with actors, with technicians, with stage crew, lighting designers, directors. There's so much talent in this city, it is unreal. And I think if you're looking outside of this city, for a director or a lighting designer or an actor, look harder and you'll find it. The talent is there. When I know, for instance, you work with Ian Salmon on a couple of plays. There's one that's getting renewed as well, the second half of this year. There is, Girls Don't Play Guitars, which is brilliant. Now, Girls Don't Play Guitars is the story of a band called the Liverbirds, who were really the first girl group. They were kind of around the same time as the Beatles, and they went to Hamburg and they had, you know, top 10 hits, number 1 hits, huge in Germany, by the way, massive, but kind of settled in Hamburg before, you know, didn't come back like the Beatles did. And this story, it was completely new to me when I read it, when Ian sent it in. And Ian's such a great writer, but there's loads of live music in it. It really engages you. And when we did it in 2019, the two surviving members of the Liverbirds would come up on stage every night and perform the last number with them. And you haven't seen anything until you've seen a woman in her 70s on the drums giving it absolute beans to peanut butter. And it's tremendous. But yeah, that's another part of it. We tell Liverpool stories, because that's a story that could have just disappeared. Well, you've been working at the Royal Court since 2005. And this is, you know, when you want to talk about the direction of travel within the city, creating that pipeline for the talent, it is something which, you know, you want to anchor it in there. For people who don't know, it's right by Lime Street Station, who might not know the city that well coming in from the outside. It's right by Lime Street Station. It couldn't be more heart of the city, the Royal Court. And that is, it's very much, whilst I've been sort of watching it from afar, across those 19 years now while you've been there, I think it's looked to anchor itself more and more inside the city. You mentioned about the revenue, you mentioned about the set building, you mentioned about the talent, but it seems like that's happening even more now than it ever has before. It does, and it comes down to the audience, because I think a lot of people look at theatre and go, oh, theatre's not for me. Or whereas our background, we used to run comedy clubs, and as you well know, the Royal Court was a gig venue, and everyone in Liverpool, their first big gig was at the Royal Court. I don't know what yours was, but everybody's got one, and their feet stuck to the floor, and they drank a warm can of Red Stripe, and it was the best experience of their life. So we had that goodwill and that love. And then when we started doing plays, we put them out as, you know, big comedies that anyone can come and enjoy. And when I first started, I'd say to my mates, do you want to come to the theatre? And they go, do I have to wear a tie? It's like, no, mate, it's not that. But we've built that audience over the last 19 years, and that audience has repaid us in spades. And so when we're doing something in Liverpool, people now come to us. They'll just go, oh, there's this story, and it's about X, X, and Y that happened in Liverpool in 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 years ago. And we're the first port of call for that, because you know that's what we do, and we do it well. So these two plays that are coming up, that are about football, how do people get tickets? They go to our website, which is liverpoolsroyalcourt.com, and just go, all the shows are on the front there, but pop into the studio section and you can buy tickets there. And while you're there, buy tickets for everything else as well. Buy tickets for everything else. More head of marketing. It's subtle, but I'm into it. Buy tickets for everything else whilst you're there as well. Fantastic stuff from the Royal Court. We'll have more about what they're up to across the next 12 months and the next months to come. Great stuff from Ian there. Do check it all out, as he pointed out. Today, we hope the WSL fixture list is coming out.
Yep, 2 o'clock.
Is it actually out at 2
Yep.
o'clock today? Magnificent stuff. Obviously, Liverpool last season, Beth, end up finishing a really, really strong 4th. It's worth pointing that out. There will, though, still be a gap to the top 3. That's not going to be solved in one summer. But Liverpool women are also back for the first pre-season training session today as well.
They are, which is really exciting because the way that the WSL season is structured, there's only 22 games, so the summer break is always a little bit longer, so they've got to wait till sort of late September to get back underway. So it does sometimes feel like a lifetime between the end of one season and the start of the next. But yeah, really exciting for Liverpool, I think, going into next season. Matt Beard has been sort of super pragmatic whenever he's spoken about sort of the expectation for next season. They obviously defy expectation a little bit to finish 4th, to beat Manchester United, who finished, I think, 33 points ahead of them the previous season. Ended up finishing 6 points behind them, which was in part down to their poor form, but Liverpool do the double over them. They get a result against Arsenal, against Chelsea as well. So really, really impressive season. I think that the challenge next season will be closing that gap to the top 4. And in the women's game, it's only the top 3 that get Europe. So getting into that spot will be tough, I think. And I think they're going into next season with some expectation on them, which is always interesting to see how teams deal with that. We saw it with sort of Aston Villa last season, finishing 5th, and there was a lot of expectation coming into the season just gone, and they didn't really live up to that expectation. So that will be interesting. But Liverpool have already made a bit of a statement. They've broke the transfer records, which obviously, admittedly in the women's game is far less than in the men's. But even so, they've spent big money in women's football terms on Olivia Smith, who's come in from Sporting, and so she's a really exciting prospect. So yeah, very, very exciting times, I think, to be a Liverpool women fan.
Indeed. So do check those fixtures out and go from there. Other thing to point out as well is that any parents who are listening to this, hello, it says here it's day 1 of 6 weeks of school holidays. 6 weeks of school holidays, day 1. Feels like, it's a slog, that, to be honest with you. If you are a parent, you've got my deepest sympathies. And you're wondering what on earth to do with your children. It says here, well, from Saturday the 20th of July to Sunday the 1st of September, you can book onto an LFC stadium tour. You can enjoy a football-themed treasure hunt around the stadium. There is face painting, games, activities, and the opportunity to do some skills as well. There is an appearance from Mighty Red on the 7th and the 21st of August. It's difficult to pin Mighty down, but Mighty found some space in the Mighty calendar on the 7th and the 21st of August if you wanted to check those ones out. If you book, you go to bookings.liverpoolfc.com/stadium tours in order to do all of that. I mentioned before, Ian Christie on the Royal Court, that bit was in there as well. I want to move on and do some lessons from history, Josh. In that Dan's already stolen me thunder, I think twice actually in the first part, which is good of him. When Adam signed on this day in 2016, Jeannie, obviously servant's a massive aspect to this, but when we sign him, the manager shifts him, and I think that's the thing that everyone remembers. But also when he does sign him in 2016 around this sort of time, we're still being linked with someone like De Hood. Like the idea that Klopp knew exactly what was going to come next, especially with Trent Alexander-Arnold, I don't think is the case. When he signs Andy Robertson, which by the way was yesterday on this day in 2017, I don't think he necessarily knows what Andy Robertson's going to be. Dan says in part 1, he talks about the manager's going to get in and start playing games, and we're going to be looking for a master plan. And I'm sure Slot's got a big idea. I'm sure he said something in these interviews, but the point is that, and you see it I think you see it most seasons with Guardiola, footballers change football teams and smart managers work out how to harness them, and Gini Wijnaldum is actually a much better example of that than just the idea of he was coming and he was always going to move position.
Yeah, well that period where we signed Wijnaldum, we got Robertson the same window, didn't we?
No, what year after?
Year after. And when we got Robertson in, that was the year that we agreed to get Naby the following summer, and around that time Trent is coming through. And I have a theory, I was looking back thinking, I think the plan was to get Naby in as a bit more of a De Bruyne kind of midfielder for the 3, and have maybe one really offensive fullback, depending on who succeeds out of centre or Robbo. They both end up flying. Naby ends up getting injured every week, and Klopp ends up going towards high-flying fullback system with a midfield department that sits behind the ball and acts as a safety net all the time. But I don't know if that was originally the plan. I think he was just kind of hedging his bets, getting in a few players who've got loads of quality and just seeing who shines. And Wijnaldum was just, your signature manager's dream, really, wasn't he? He could just literally do anything, and he was a completely different player for his national team compared to his club. That was because his role was changing. Holland didn't really have goals, so he needs to provide that for Holland. Liverpool did, so he needs to provide something else, and just does it, with ease. I'm not sure who slots Wijnaldum might be. I think there's a few of them. And, touching on the experiments that Dan's just mentioned about pre-season and going into the season and that, I'm all for that stuff. I love all that, little tactical experiments and that mid-season. It's interesting to see how players thrive in different conditions and that. But we have definitely got a versatile group, and we've got loads of players who Slot can play with. I think some are more rounded than others where you can do that with. I think someone, for example, like Nunes, I think has specific qualities that you need to present him with a platform to thrive. Some others, I think, can just be tested in different spots. But yeah, anyone like Wijnaldum would be a godsend, really.
I think the idea, for me, Dan, is that experimentation. I think you get to see it. I think you get to see it through, now we look back on 16, 17 and sort of go, well, certain things were getting put in place and the manager knew exactly where he was. He was still working out as he was going. I think that's the excellence, really, of the previous manager, is that he was very pragmatic, so a misused word in football, but he was, I think, in terms of looking at how to get the best out of the group that was in front of him. I think, up until 2020, there was clearly a lot of ongoing pragmatism there with the decisions he was making. And I don't think he ever got too stuck on anything. I think he was happy to be led by his footballers, and I think that's a massive positive in a manager. I really do. I think that a manager who can see what his footballers are going to be able to bring him for an extended period of time and work with that is more valuable than one who says, no, this is what we do, and you're either going to fit it or you're not.
Yeah, a lot of it is about having trust in certain both characters and skill sets, and you maybe need a good few players, 3 or 4, who you think you can entirely trust in both to do different jobs really efficiently well. I think one of the other players that he did that with was play Milner a fullback for a season. In between 17, in between him getting Wijnaldum and then Robertson the year later, he had a left back there that if he wanted to do the high flying thing, as Josh was talking about, he could have just gone with Moreno and gone, you know what, I'm going to work on you. I think can teach you the maybe sort of mental strength in order to be able to do this, because he had the pace and things like that, but he didn't. He went with instead somebody out of position who he thought, I can harness the skills you've got, but more importantly probably the mentality that you've got to get through this year, and then we'll reassess it in 12 months time and see what we can do from there. When he took the Liverpool job, I don't think he ever planned to be playing James Milner a full-back for the whole year. But you get to a point where you weigh up, all right, these are the options we've got, we stick to this really what we think is maybe a strong platform that we're working towards, and this is the tactic, and these are what the full-backs have got to do, but we're going to have to play someone we think might be a bit shit. Or do we compromise on the way of playing, but we get someone that we really trust and is very efficient, and therefore maybe the other players on the pitch will trust them that little bit more, and their positives can be accentuated more than his. And he went with the latter. I think different managers would make different choices in that kind of situation. There are some, as you say, that would just go, no, I play football in a certain way, and we take the ones that can do that and put them into it, and anyone else we're not hugely interested in, and we're going to go and spend 25 million quid on a second version of this type of midfielder or this type of fullback or whatever it could be. I think one of his key strengths over the time was, well, a combination, I suppose, of patience and adaptability, Klopp, in terms of waiting for certain players to be in, he would say the best moment for them to take on a certain role in the first team. When Robertson came, he didn't start playing for months. Yeah. He actually went back to picking Moreno fairly often, which is strange. But it was only around the late autumn, I think, that it really became...
It's December 17.
Andy Robertson is Liverpool's left back now and just plays all the time.
His performance against City in the 4-3 is really important.
Yeah, and that seems like it, because it was, I suppose, that's like really far into Klopp's time. I suppose it was getting towards 3 years, but it was not far into Robertson's time. And it's not a case like the jury's still being out, but he wasn't Liverpool's absolute first choice left back, and he's going to play for us for 7 more years in this position at that time. I think Liverpool at the moment have got a lot of players who have got really widespread skill sets, can do a lot of things technically well, really efficient players, could play in loads of different positions, nice adaptable characters as well, so that's really helpful. But it does mean that a lot of the stuff is a bit intangible, so there's not a lot of those Nunes type players, which is not necessarily a bad thing, that you look at and go, well, these are your strengths and that's where you should play. There are maybe 7 or 8 you could go, well, you could do all these different things for us, and nothing immediately jumps out that's like, you should absolutely be doing this. And the way that we've played football previously, there's not necessarily an immediate, oh, you go in this hole because that's what makes most sense for you and you're going to play there all the time. I think over certainly the first year there'll be a lot of taking people like Jones, Elliott, Szoboszlai, even people like McAllister, who maybe had like stronger individual seasons last year than them, and doing different things with them and testing how adaptable they are to even maybe sometimes playing the same position but in a different way into different sort of opponent. I think there's a lot of players now who you wouldn't necessarily say that person is an out and out X or whatever, and given what we said about, we reckon the shape may well change or be adapted as time goes by, I think you'll see quite a lot of players getting asked to do really different things, and that will be a significant test of how useful they are going forward. Is how do they adapt to that? How good are they at getting not just the best out of themselves, but probably more importantly, the best out of other people? Because that was the key thing about Wijnaldum, was the way he played for Liverpool. He had loads of skills himself. He got Liverpool up the pitch really well, dead hard to get off the ball, really strong, good range of short passing certainly, but mostly helped everyone else be like 10% better every single time that he played. And I think there are quite a few members of the current Liverpool squad who, if they're able to do that same thing, will prove really, really valuable to this manager and his team now.
It's why anticipating, again, back to the transfer point, and maybe even part of why the transfers are running a little bit slower for Liverpool, Beth. Anticipating the what of what he's going to want is quite difficult. If you take the goalkeepers out of it, because, you know, as we often say at the Anfield Wrap, they're not proper footballers. The look Andy gives me every single time makes it worthwhile. They are, of course, proper footballers. Some would say that the best ones. Certainly our proper goalkeeper is absolutely incredible. But anyway, without being mean about the goalkeepers, they do at least play in goal. You can say that was certain. You can probably say Van Dijk, Konate, Quansah, I would say Robertson and Tsimikas, Endo and Nunez, and maybe it in terms of being able to say this is where they play. Mm-hmm. That everyone else, you can make a case for X, you can make a case for Y, you can make a case for Z, and maybe that's a lot of what's happening. Liverpool maybe want a number of them to still have that multifunctionality, but that also Slot needs to decide maybe on a couple of them, no, this is where they will do something for me, up to and including in a few instances possibly leave. Everyone else, I think you can have a bit of a chat about one way or another about them either being able to do bits elsewhere than the expected position, or maybe even not having one that's locked down.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting, and I think it's sort of an extension of what you were saying earlier in terms of clever managers and clever footballers can do that. And I think more and more, I think the game has changed to, certainly for the top teams, it's quite rare to have, 11 players who play in one position and that's that. I mean, you've got to look at City. De Bruyne obviously is one of the best midfielders that the league has ever seen, but under Pep he's played at false 9, he's played on the wing. Foden a little bit the same as well. He's completely scrapped the idea of conventional fullbacks, hasn't he? He's had centre-halves playing at fullback and doing a good job there and inverting. So, yeah, it is really exciting. And I suppose the one concern is you don't want to get to the start of the season and think, well, I don't really have a clue, sort of, who's going where. And it does always take a little bit of time, especially when a new manager comes in, to sort of figure out your best 11. And, that's not helped by players obviously not coming back until a little bit later on, post sort of international tournament. So I think we are likely to see a lot of chopping and changing. Probably maybe in the first couple of months. As Dan said earlier about Robertson not coming in and sort of being a real mainstay in the team until nearly Christmas. So yeah, I think it's exciting more than anything else though to have that versatility.
It's interesting Beth mentions City there, Josh. I've got 6 for City. Walker Diaz, Rodri, Kovacic, Haaland and Grealish, who I'd say, if they're on the team sheet, you can pretty much say this is where they're going to play from minute 1. Rodri gets asked to do a couple of different things, but it's mostly break glass. It's a bit of an emergency. Rodri, can you just go and score the winning goal in the European Cup final for us, mate? That'd be great.
Yeah, along with everything else.
Along with everything else, exactly, that you're in the midst of. But that's the sort of 6 that I can think of who I'd say tend to do the same thing, both game to game and during games. Mentioning Liverpool, the flip side is, and I know you're a massive fan, is you write an Arsenal team sheet down, I can tell you where everyone is.
Yeah. It feels like Arsenal, I've kind of got everything set in that department, really, don't they? And even going and signing Calafiore, you know exactly what the plan is. You can just see it. And that was the case with Liverpool for a short period as well. But it feels like even with Klopp, with the, being shaped by how players are developing and that over time and things like that, even Klopp, I felt like, I think he's actually come out and said this, that from the off, Firmino was big for him in terms of the initial, what can we do with this team? How can we shape the future of this team? A lot of it was based on where Firmino was going to be as the key cog, if you want. And I think any manager coming in like that, looking at a new group and planning the future or whatever, will always have be led by a lot of developments, certainly, but he will always have key pillars. Who are the people I'm going to hang my hat on every week and who are going to shape? Like, for example, Liverpool have, in my opinion, back four centre-halves that want to play in a back four as opposed to a back three. Van Dijk's definitely one of them. I think Konate's one of them as well. They're probably your two starters if they're both fit. So, how do you go? If you look up top, Núñez, for example, is completely different to Firmino in terms of what he offers as a striker. Rather than coming deep, he runs away from the ball. So how do you occupy the 10 space? Do you do it with two players? Do you do it with one player? Are the fullbacks overlapping? Are they not? Can the wide forwards cope without, if they're not getting overlapped? Do they need the overlapping to perform better? So there's lots of experiments, as you say, to kind of look forward to over the summer. I think Gakpo, though, was coming to mind when you were saying about, this is what we know the player wants or what the player needs or what the player is or whatever. I think Gakpo, when we first signed him and over the past year, would have been a player where we would have thought, yeah, definitely, well-rounded, can do anything. But I do think more and more over time, and going back to his Euros performance, is painting himself more and more as a player who wants to know exactly what he's doing every week. And, Slot hinted, and I have an idea of what I'm going to do with him, but I want to speak to the player first. Be interesting to see what that is, because, seeing Gakpo as like a left-sided 8 over the past year, I think he's been anonymous. I have question marks as him as a 9, if I'm honest. But as on the left, I do think he looks at home there, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that player.
Well, indeed. All of it is to come this week. If you're coming to any of the shows in the United States, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Should hopefully be a lot of fun. If you haven't got those tickets yet, do act fast, especially for Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. You can't say you haven't been warned on that one. Been an absolute pleasure working through the whole thing. We didn't even get to talk about Versatility, around whom there's a fair bit of conversation. All of a sudden, early this week, we'll pass on him. We'll see what he's up to across the next few games, and we'll be able to talk about it. Thank you very much to Jordan Singleton for producing the images, if you've watched it that way. It's been a pleasure. Andy Heaton's pulling faces at me for goalkeeper criticism, and also for me the real high point was when he ducked behind Dan Austin, but he then came up too early. Jordan, is that right? Because you were watching it on the screens. Yeah. Sorry, Ant. You weren't to know. That's the way in which it goes. I could see Jordan's face straight away was that he's just ducked up too early there. Dan Austin for powering through whilst that was happening to him, Beth Lindop, and to Josh Williams. It has been the Anfield Wrap. It's been an absolute pleasure. Next time you see me on anything in any way, shape or form, I suspect it will be in the United States.